My name is Štěpán Šanda, and I am doctoral researcher at Charles University, or doctoral student at Faculty of Social Sciences. I really thank you, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak here, and I thank all previous speakers, and I hope I will try somehow enrich the topics we were discussing here. So let me start with one picture, with two pictures, and those who read the abstract may also now expect what they will look like. These two memes, one can come across around the internet to these memes, and maybe you can think that it is not proper to or suitable to start academic presentation with two memes, but or in this silly way. But I think those top and bottom texts say something about self-perception of Eastern Europeans and somehow their relationships to the rest of the world or rest of the Europe specifically. Because these two are state representatives or used to be state representatives of Czechia or Poland specifically or respectively. And it is also important to notion here that like in these memes, I can read that those representatives are traveling somewhere and we can think of where they are traveling. We think that, or we can suppose that they are not traveling to west. They are traveling to the east, and that's why they are so surprised that the countryside or the landscape is more destroyed than that they would ever expect it. And this is something as a stereotype maybe that we as former communists or former Soviet bloc like to think that those more in Eastern that are somehow more primitive, more like underdeveloped and things like that. So when we are travel to the East, we expect that we are going to see some strange and really bizarre things. Here is some like social or cultural context. I use former Yugoslavian philosopher or political scientist Boris Buden. He's Croatian, I think, and he has this thesis that with the end of communism, Eastern Europeans got stuck in a paradoxical situation. They were like in discourse there, they were started to flourish these metaphors of like education for democracy, that we need to somehow pass the exams of democracy, school of democracy with diapers and things like that. And in this conception, post-communism is something as a transition phase, and also it there is this like metaphor or with like catching up with the West, that we need to somehow negate the 40 years of communism and these neglected opportunities that post-World War II states have in the West, and we didn't because of the communism. And yes, sir. And the catching up with the West also means that we must somehow be more Western than the West, that we are somehow fetishized the Western, I don't know, capitalism, Western economies, and we idealized that the individual is the core element of the society, or there is no society, there is just individuals, as Margaret Thatcher famously said. And we like want to step forward by these, with this mantra in mind. And my question is, can post-apocalyptic games resemble this transitional white East? And probably yes, I think so. And my second question is, if does Eastern European apocalypse differ from the Western one? And specifically, I want to ask if we can see these differences in their landscapes and how the post-apocalyptic landscape look in the East and in comparison with the Western. And because it's somehow like important because we all discussed, for example, during this day, all of those famous Western titles, and I don't know, Stalker was mentioned once. Someone mentioned Metro, but there are, and I work with them too. But yeah, there are some other Eastern European post-apocalyptic games. This is like notoriously known screenshot from Last of Us, and it shows the landscape, which is somehow idealistic. I don't know, maybe it is not like pessimistic view. It is somehow we can see that the nature is like in the COVID, there was this phrase, nature is healing itself. And this is something similar. And I think that empty spaces, or I use with the Walter, that the empty spaces in post-apocalyptic fictions can function as critical comments to contemporary social formations. And typical example for me is Dawn of the Dead by George Romero, where he set the premise in the shopping mall as a critique of consumer culture and zombies as somehow mindless consumers. And the activity of like consuming the brains is somehow similar to how we consume things in our culture. Also in some argue that there is a strong notion of hope in the Western or popular Western games, as because there is some dystopian settings, but in these dystopian settings there are utopian enclaves, and it is something we can cling on. We can like strive to get there, and in them there are some like. He works with terms Pérez-Latorre as post-apocalyptic cowboys, as like strong individuals who can somehow shape the unpleasant reality to their own view. There is also the notion of back to the nature and DIY culture, and also some community leaders and a sense of rebellion against these harsh conditions. And also, as we can see here, and as I introduced the screenshot, there is a like notion or importance of nurturing coming back to its pristine state, its pre-human state in the post-human world. We can see it again in one of the mostly mentioned or hugely mentioned game here, Horizon Zero Dawn. And as we can see, this is like, I chose this this picture because it somehow embodies the optimistic landscape with the golden hour, sun is setting down or rising up. It somehow like evokes those pictures of Wild West, of the deep or white prairie that we can like pass with our horse and don't look back. And also it somehow correspond with the narrative of the hero Horizon Zero Dawn, because the main character, or like one of the most positive connotated tribes here, is the one who lives in the most symbiotic way with the nature. And yeah, and in the post-apocalyptic games, or in the Western post-apocalyptic games, are popular, as says Pérez-Latorre. This motive of back to the nature is really important, and it also serves usually as something hopeful. Like, if okay, apocalypse happened, but now we can like start again, start better, maybe start with the more close or closer relationship with the nature. And as I mentioned, these are not the only post-apocalyptic worlds. Some of apocalypses happened in former former Soviet spaces. Here's one quote: Eastern Europeans evokes a very particular set of association, likely of ill-read Russian literature imagined to be weighty and desolate as the landscape itself. And now, finally, some pictures from Eastern games or Central European or post-Soviet games. These are screenshots from DayZ, which is a game from Bohemia Interactive, Czech developer studio. And here we can see some typical architecture. For example, the picture at the bottom left from my side, so your bottom right, is it's like it's the biggest residential area in the DayZ, and it used typical architecture of 70s and 80s in Czech towns and cities, and also the screenshot up there is looks or somehow looks like a typical border town in Czechia, and like border region where called Sudety, from which Germans were like deported after the World War II. And if you can somehow remember the picture from the Last of Us with this somehow beautiful landscape, you can now compare it with this landscape from DayZ and how the town or how the city looks like. This is much more somehow worn out. This is more decayed, more boring, maybe even. And some says that in DayZ, the ordinary decay, there is no guarantees or institutional securities that guarantees the player status. And it is also influenced by the multiplayer nature of the game, because most of the previously mentioned game are single player, and the experience of playing them is much more different from the multiplayer, where players somehow are they can behave more mischievously, more selfish, and it supports mistrust, because the death of your character is permanent, and when you die or your character dies, you must start over again. And also, as I mentioned, the stereotypicalization of our more eastern neighbors. This is typical example, because DayZ is originally mod for Arma 3, and the Arma 3 is set on a fictional Russian Republic, and the architecture and the landscape is inspired by underdeveloped or somehow structurally disadvantaged regions in Czechia, which are dependent on coal mines and things like that. And now we can see that the developer associated something less developed with the Russian or fictional Russian Republic. And and it is also, we can talk about some kind of self-exotization or romanticization of the East in this game. And okay, we can move. These are screenshots from S.T.A.L.K.E.R, and which were modeled after real exclusion zone in Chernobyl. And the reactor is even depicted there, or more precisely, the sarcophagus of the reactor. And the S.T.A.L.K.E.R, it is good to mention that it is inspired by novel by Strugatsky brothers, which is called Picnic by the Road, I think. And this book inspired Andrei Tarkovsky's film by the same name. And the GSC Game World developer identified the zone from the Strugatsky's novel, ergo Tarkovsky's film with the Chernobyl exclusion zone. And this is interesting because this is maybe the closest in the real world where we can get to the real apocalypse, or where the world where the closest to the end of its end. And that's why it attracts tourists. Okay, I must bit like faster. And sorry for and we can also like discuss, it attracts tourists, and we already discussed here about that people like danger, people like unknownness, and so they go visit to this. And is this something, because landscape needs to be experienced, and in some point of time your like virtual experience won't satisfy you enough. And also in this game, and the landscape functions more like a depiction of temporality, of like human inventions, temporality, and Anthropocene more specifically, because we can talk about geology of media and slow decay, which somehow transfers our physical bodies. And the last game I want to discuss is Metro series, and I try to be quick. In Metro series are again adaptations of novels, this time by Ukrainian writer Dmitry Glikovsky. And what is interesting is that the game happens or is set mostly in the underground, and the underground sets as something what Liederman calls as mutant utopias, because these different factions are zombified 20th century as neo-Nazis Fourth Reich, Stalinist Red Line, or Jehovah's Witnesses. And you sometimes get to the surface, but it is not just as interesting. Or Joshua mentioned that we should like use the knowledge of the past, but this is, I think, a screenshot from Moscow Library, and it is completely destroyed, so we can't use or even the wisdom of the past is maybe useless in the setting of the life in the underground. And as my friend says, he likes to say that every time where somewhere is underground or subterranean, we should like be more psychoanalytical, so we can maybe think if the subterranean of this game is psychoanalytically it of our like political, that extreme conditions lead to extreme responses by extreme political regimes or ideologies. And also the rail is important for this game because it shows us, and the game narrative is somehow tricky bit in the final revelation. It depends how you behave, and if you behave badly or in a typical first-person shooter, you will soon get know that it is a bad way how to play this game. And the rail is in this case somehow typical, because if you don't change the rail at the exact time, you will end at the, I don't know, dead end, for example, or and the destination you maybe don't want to end. And to fasten things up, these are my concluding remarks. Eastern European post-apocalyptic landscape is mundane. It is set more in our familiar environment, more ordinary in comparison for some Western titles. It is like less sublime on the first sight, but maybe more in the second, because we don't have a time or we don't have opportunity to explore it more and to get more familiar. Like with the Stalker, the bizarre things still happened, and we can't somehow prevent them or things like that. and or preview them. And it is this everyday environment. There are usually our everyday things like cars, and we can joke that maybe the only thing that games added to Eastern European landscape are zombies or monsters or mutants. And yeah, we can't ignore, like this game maybe show us that we cannot ignore the material culture of the West we so much strived for in the past, and we can't like let it go. And yeah, and this slow disintegration can be read, or I like to read it as a typical for the region in the past year. It is slow decay, somehow lowering trust in institutions, resentment for the past, searching our own place in changing world. And it is important, the landscape is important because it is always there in the games. And in my games mentioned, the protagonist is much less clear character, because it is somehow like blank canva, because for example in S.T.A.L.K.E.R you play for Strelok, who doesn't remember his past. Arteme is typical FPS protagonist, and DayZ it is just a role play. So I like to end again with my memes, and because these memes can illustrate the landscape of Eastern Europe games in comparison to the Western ones. While the Western ones show usually already finished change, the landscape is usually already radically transformed. And the Eastern ones show like landscape in process of transformation. The landscape is still resemble our lands and countries in spite of all destruction and desolation. So these are my references, which I couldn't read, and this is my ludography, and thank you.